It is April 30th, 1803, and you are watching this report from New Orleans. The United States has just bought all of this land from France for $15 million, or about 3 cents per acre. This vast territory stretches from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. It's nearly 900,000 square miles, an area larger than the entire country of Brazil. It's also the largest real estate transaction in world history. And if that seems surprising, well, yeah, it is, because today we're talking about the Louisiana Purchase. So why did France sell off so much land? Why did the US buy it? And why did they agree on such an odd price? Well, let's find out. France first came into possession of this land back in 1682, when French explorers laid claim to the Mississippi River Valley and everything west of it. At the time, France was a global superpower with colonies on every continent. But while their North American colony was technically known as New France, most of it was controlled by rival Spain, which had carved its own Louisiana out of the northern part of the territory. France never really had much success in colonizing the region, largely because there weren't enough people to go around. While the French colonial population peaked at just 7,000 people, the Spanish side had over 10 times that amount. But despite the odds, colonial Louisiana would grow throughout the 18th century. Part of the reason for this was the abundance of furs in the region, which created a lucrative market for fur trading. In fact, the Mississippi River was one of the busiest waterways in the world during this period, mostly due to the amount of fur being shipped down the river to New Orleans and then shipped off across the Atlantic. That is, until the British came along. You see, one of the stipulations of the 7 Years' War was that the Mississippi River would be closed to shipping unless the goods were being transported through a British port. This meant that the French and Spanish colonies were cut off from international trade, which led to severe economic decline. By the end of the war, both colonies were bankrupt and heavily in debt to the British. So what was France to do? Well, the answer came unexpectedly from across the ocean. Napoleon Bonaparte was first secretary of the French colonies and was looking for ways to fund his conquest of Europe, and he saw the economic potential of Louisiana. The problem was getting it from bankrupt to bankrupt. Napoleon first considered selling the entire territory to Spain, but ultimately decided that it wasn't worth giving up control of the Mississippi River, not to mention the millions of dollars that could be made in doing so. In the meantime, Napoleon's former secretary, Thomas Jefferson, had become the third president of the United States. And like any good real estate agent, he saw an opportunity when he heard about the Louisiana Territory being up for sale. Jefferson immediately sent an agent to New Orleans to purchase the port city from France for a maximum of $10 million. But after arriving in the city, he found that Napoleon wasn't willing to part ways with just the port. He wanted to sell the entire territory. Now, Jefferson had no authority to purchase additional land, so he instead made a counteroffer of $11 million. Napoleon accepted, and the United States had just doubled in size. But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from there. See, while Napoleon had hoped to use the money to fund his war effort, $11 million wasn't quite enough to make that happen. He had originally hoped to earn closer to $20 million, so he decided to pull a sneaky move and add an additional $600,000 to the contract as a commission for his agents. Once he realized what had happened, Jefferson fought back, claiming that the contract was complicated and there was no way he could get the Senate to approve the deal if the price kept changing. Napoleon, however, had already spent the money and refused to budge. Ultimately, the United States paid the full $11.6 million and took possession of the Louisiana Territory on December 20th, 1803. However, even though the purchase had been completed, the legality of it wouldn't be settled for another 40 years. As it turns out, the United States didn't actually have the authority to purchase land without approval from Congress. When James Madison brought this up, he was essentially told to hush. After all, the Louisiana Purchase was wildly popular among the general public, and no one was going to risk losing all that support by reopening a debate over the purchase. Of course, that still leaves the question of how the United States came up with such an odd purchase price. If France wanted to make $20 million from the sale, why did they settle for 3 cents per acre? Well, it's largely because they thought the land was worthless. You see, all of the wealth in the region was being generated by the Mississippi River, and anything farther away from the river was simply too much of a hassle to try and profit from. In fact, Napoleon once famously remarked that the only reason he had given the territory to the United States for free was because he feared that Spain might seize the land if it appeared to be abandoned. However, the United States didn't pay just 3 cents per acre for the land. Instead, the price was 3 cents per acre of surveyed land. At the time, only a small portion of the territory had been properly surveyed, so the vast majority of it was purchased for an average of 15 cents per acre. While this was a great deal for the United States, it wasn't such a great deal for the Native Americans who lived there. See, the Louisiana Purchase forcibly displaced dozens of tribes, including the Chickasaw, Natchez, Cherokee, and many more. And while most of them were relocated peacefully, others resisted the forced relocation for decades. For example, the Choctaw tribe had 10 million acres of land in present-day Mississippi, but they were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. During the relocation, only 2.5 million acres were surveyed, so the United States only had to pay France $75,000 for their land. To make matters worse, the United States broke the terms of the treaty that allowed the Choctaw to keep their land, and it's believed that thousands of Choctaw died during the relocation due to disease and starvation. The other major consequence of the Louisiana Purchase was the Lewis and Clark expedition. In order to learn more about the newly acquired land, President Jefferson commissioned Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to travel through the Louisiana Purchase and document everything they found. Their journey began in St. Louis, Missouri, and followed the Missouri River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They returned to St. Louis 2 years later with extensive knowledge of the region, which helped set the stage for the United States westward expansion. Ultimately, the Louisiana Purchase had enormous consequences for the future of the United States. It removed the threat of European colonialism by giving the U.S. total control of the Mississippi River. It secured access to the port of New Orleans, which allowed farmers in the Midwest to ship their goods overseas, and it opened up huge swaths of land for settlers looking for a piece of the American dream. In the aftermath, the United States would continue to acquire land through purchases, treaties, and wars until they reached their current size. So while the Louisiana Purchase didn't add all of the land that we currently possess, it certainly kick-started our nation's incredible growth. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you want to catch more of our historical tales. Thanks for watching.